Welcome back, everybody. Well, it's been a little while, but I thought it was time to dive back into some more Hearts of Iron 4. And this is a mod that I visited a while back, maybe a year and a half ago, but I was playing on the Steam version of the mod, which is not the most recent version. This is a mod called End of a New Beginning, and it actually starts in 1857, and you can take it not only into the present day, but into the future as well. And so I thought I'd go ahead and do that. And we're going to take on the United States. I don't often play as the United States in mods like this, but when we take over the United States in 1857, we're taking over with the administration of James Buchanan. This is 4 years before the American Civil War begins, so we're definitely going to be facing that. And we'll see what happens. So we'll take on this mod. I do want to real quickly just show you some of the other available options. I've got the United Kingdom, of course, the French Empire, the Kingdom of Prussia, the Russian Empire, the Austrian Empire, the Kingdom of, I guess that's probably Sardinia, and then all these other, Republic of Mexico, Abyssinia, Sweden, Peru, and you can see, just those are some of the major choices that you have. Let's go ahead and take a look at the world as it exists in 1857. You can see here's the United States. You can see all the various Native American tribes that are there. Hudson Bay Company, Northwest Territory, New Caledonia, Republic of Mexico. You can see down here you've got New Grenada, Venezuela, Empire of Brazil. Over here in Africa, you can see all the various nations. I don't know how many of those are actually playable. Then you have Europe here. Go over into the east, take a look at all the various nations that you have, and it's a little glitchy, I've discovered, but I think it should play pretty smoothly once we get into it. Now, caveat, with most Hearts of Iron 4 series that I start, at some point, for whatever reason, because I normally play with mods, we end up glitching out or the save game won't work. I'm going to play this as long as we may find ourselves in a similar situation. So let's dive in. Okay, so here we are, and you can see here the United States of America, insignificant power. So I have an overall power projection of 165, most of the industry and military, no prestige or technological projection. So it's going to take some getting used to because the interface is completely different. We have things that we didn't have in the other versions. You have political stability and national stability. You have court support. You have legitimacy. Of course, legislative power. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the national focus trees that we have to choose from on this particular mod. Okay, so here we have the American focus tree, and I'm going to zoom out just so you can see just how huge it is. There's a lot of depth to this focus tree. And up at the top are the ones that we're going to be mostly concerned with early in the game. American Civil War. This will only trigger this tree once the Civil War breaks out. Panic of 1857, same way. When that breaks out, this will become available to us. Buchanan Presidency is the only one that's currently available. Reconstruction era will kick in after the Civil War is over. But then beyond that, you've got down here, as part of the whole Reconstruction era focus tree, you've got begin readmission of the states one by one. You've got an integration plan here. You've got Civil War tactics there. You've got a full, huge diplomacy tree here. So there's a lot of depth to this game. Now, early on, there's only one that we can choose until events start unfolding, and that's the Buchanan Presidency. So we'll go ahead and choose that. Now let's look at research. We've got 4 slots available. And I want to look at what technologies we currently have available to us. So right here you've got weapons, 1860, Springfield rifle over here, the mini rifle. So it seems like they've really done their work, but you see there are additional tabs that we didn't have in the vanilla Hearts of Iron game. This has all really been thought out, and they've put a ton of work into this compared to a lot of mods where they kind of do some things, and a few nations have really good focus trees, but others don't have a lot. This one is really planned out, and it's got so much depth. I hope it stays playable and it's not too unstable that we'll be able to play through this for a long, long time to come. You can see it does take a little while for me to click on one thing to the next, and I don't know if I change the graphic settings if that'll help with that. Even in air research, we can go all the way to early recon balloons, and then recon balloon 2, and then eventually get into the Zeppelins, and you can see monoplane scouts, etc. Air Doctrine is going to be the same way. And we'll look more at these research trees as we're actually doing the research. I want to look at a couple of other things before we start moving into this game. Here we have the Events and Decisions tab, and you can see things like promote American war austerity, boost Army morale, develop the homeland, subsidize the American shipbuilding industry, advance to the machine era. And I don't know exactly what advancing to different eras does, but we'll figure that out as we go along. We've got religious affairs, internal politics, of course, the game options. On the trade panel, we have an expanded trade options. We have oil, aluminum, rubber, tungsten, and steel, and chromium, which are the traditional ones for hearts of iron. But beyond that, we also have additional items. It looks like coal, wood, cloth, probably machine parts, and I don't know what that is. But as you can see, there's a lot of freezing up that this does. I'm going to go change my graphic settings and see if it helps with that. Okay, so I did make a couple of changes to the graphics, and it does seem to be running much more smoothly now. So we're going to go ahead and start picking our research. We're going to go with Industrial Society, which is going to give me a slight legislative power gain as well as a monthly population gain. And then we're going to go ahead and add a few other things on top of that. One last thing before we get into the game itself, you can see all of the different things that you can build. You've got civilian and military industry, yes, but then you've got naval dockyards, oil refineries, fuel silos, rubber refineries, rocket sites, coal mines, nuclear reactors, cotton farms, textile mills, logging camps, steel mills, machine parts factory, electronics. So I think that's what that other item was in trade. And I think since I restarted the game now, it seems like now it's running much more smooth. So you can see how many different things you've got to deal with. And of course, we've got all of these divisions, the National Guard, light cavalry, infantry regiments that are all kind of spread out across the country here. And we'll have to get them organized into some forces. I don't think I'm going to build any additional units right now because I just don't have that much manpower. You can see our population, 28.62 million. And we're just going to work on what we're going to build up with some of these things, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. A couple more things down here. You can see how many decisions there are. Arrest opposition leaders, ban opposition parties, grant statehood to Kansas, Nebraska, Oregon, and Minnesota, and propose the Harris Treaty. So there's a lot here, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm putting together my army, and you can see we've got some commanders that probably weren't commanders yet. I mean, they were in the army, but they didn't rise to the rank of general until later. But these are all Civil War generals that you can see here. So that's pretty cool. And they've all got their real pictures, which is pretty awesome as well. We'll go ahead and put Robert E. Lee in command of the army for now, because it was his to command. And once we get to Civil War time, we're actually at war with the Seminoles right now. So we're going to have to go ahead and finish that off. And that won't take long. We're just going to send all our divisions down there to deal with them. So now we're setting the stage for what is to come, the divided states of America. It's a bleak time for the United States. Ever since we declared ourselves independent, we've been plagued by the issue of slavery. That's absolutely correct. Although the United States would implement policies on slavery, such as the act prohibiting the importation of slaves in 1807, but even still this institution would continue. So a little background on that. When they were passing the Constitution, one of the things that was built into the Constitution was that they put off being able to ban the slave trade, the overseas slave trade. The earliest it could take effect was January of 1808. So in 1807, they passed a law that would take effect on the first eligible date for that to take place. So there's a lot more there. We're not going to take the time to read all that, but that hurts our legislative power. Basically, we are completely impotent as a government until the Civil War breaks out, and that's true. The series of presidents leading up to the Civil War are all rated pretty low for a reason, and that's because none of them really did anything decisive to deal with the issue of slavery and the building tension between North and South. They only kind of kicked the can down the road. So it's all going to come to head here soon. All right, that's world events that don't really concern me too much. Okay, the slavery debate. The issue of slavery has lingered as long as the United States has existed. Our founding fathers could not solve the issue, nor the generation after that. All they had done is pass the torch onto the slave issue down to us, and the tensions over slavery starting to boil. Well, Buchanan was pretty much a so what kind of guy or a status quo kind of guy, but you can see honestly, nothing really changes except change in popularity of centrism. There's really no major change that I can make that impacts things long term. So we're in the Buchanan presidency here. We really only have one choice, which is Utah war. We're really super limited until after the Civil War as far as what we do. Kingdom of Württemberg integrates liberalism. So things happening elsewhere. It'll be interesting to see how Europe shakes out, because we know that the 1860s, 1870s were a time of great upheaval in Europe, especially where Germany is concerned. So I'll be interested to see how that all shakes out. All right, so we've got 52 legislative power, and we've got some options as far as things that we can do with that. Oh, here's the Dred Scott decision. So Dred Scott versus Sanford case was cleared up on March 6, 1857. The result was ruled that Dred Scott, who resided in a free state, was not entitled to his freedom, and that African Americans could not be citizens of the United States. The outrage over the ruling in the North has not died down. So one of the biggest effects of this decision was that it overturned the Missouri Compromise, because they basically said that the federal government had no authority over the issue of slavery. So, pardon Dred Scott. Again, some of this goes towards centrism. We're going to pardon Dred Scott just because, even though it's going to hurt stability, in my mind, it's the right thing to do. Obviously, I'm acting with almost 200 years of hindsight in saying that. But that cost us the legislative power that I was about to spend. So now we'll have to wait a little while before I can spend those points. But I think I'm going to probably admit one of these states to the Union, maybe Oregon. Actually, we'll probably go with Minnesota for now, because Kansas, man, that's just a bloodbath waiting to happen anyway. Okay, so we just finished industrial society. Now we have Saint Simonianism, legislative power gain. That's actually really nice, that extra 4%. Because legislative power does so much in this game. So anything I can do to get that power early is going to be good. Right now we're gaining almost one a day. And as soon as we hit 50 again, assuming things don't get messed up, we'll go ahead and admit Minnesota to the Union. You can see here we also have all these economic policies. So let's take a look at those for a minute. 12-hour workday. Can be changed. No workday limit. You can see some of these are really expensive on legislative power. So you can see why legislative power becomes so important, because there are some really impactful decisions that can be made that cost a ton of that power. All right, so let's go ahead and add Minnesota to the Union. Not sure what practical effect that has, other than just to add territory that I already own as an actual state. Hey, this is actually not too far away from where I live. It's about an hour away, and I actually have family ancestors that are buried near Titusville. The first successful usage of an oil rig on a well that was specifically drilled to produce oil instead of drilling for salt water and removing the oil, as had originally been a byproduct of making salt water drinkable. So that's, and then here's the Panic of 1857. Russian Empire declared war on the Caucasus Imamate. So that's a Muslim territory. So here we go in the Panic of 1857. Financial experts were shocked today as the United States stock market dropped, sparking an economic crisis within the country. So Titusville, as I was starting to say, is actually right around here. It's in between Pittsburgh and Erie, Pennsylvania, and east of Cleveland. It's right in this area here. All right, so now we've got the Panic of 1857, which that bypasses that national focus, which now allows me to go after these things, which I'd much rather be dealing with these trees than with this one, because we're going to start focusing on the north as far as our building priority, because we're going to have to put down the Southern Rebellion here pretty soon. Now, I believe that if you take on the role of the Confederacy, you get Confederacy-specific focus trees, but for this particular playthrough, we're going to take on the Union. All right, so panic control. This will give me 50 in legislative power. We're actually just now hitting 50 again. So let's see if there's anything we can do with that. I might want to hang on for now to those points. We could stabilize the nation. This will give me a base stability of 1, but it's going to hurt my legislative power gain. So I think we'll hold off on that for now. So with the crash of the SS Central America, which cost me 50 legislative power, that's kind of the problem right now, is that there are just so many things that kill those legislative power points. We're going to start looking at the Army because we're going to be getting toward the Civil War here before too long. So I'm going to do some of those things. Let's look at Army doctrines. Focus on industry, production efficiency base, Army experience gain, division recovery rate, artillery attack. These are all really expensive and are going to take a while, so I think we'll hold off on that. Cordless steam engine, factory output, dockyard output. Let's do that. And then let's look over here at socioeconomics and humanities. Stability, political advisor costs. Let's do that. This morning, Virginia plantation owner George Washington Parke Custis died at the ripe old age of 79, though not biologically related to the Washingtons. He was adopted by Martha and George Washington. Now, that's actually a little bit misleading because George Washington Parke Custis was Martha Washington's biological grandson. He was her son Jackie's son. So they did adopt him. So he was an adopted son to George and Martha Washington, but he was a biological grandson of Martha Washington. And he was also the father of Robert E. Lee, Robert E. Lee's wife. So you can see that here. So it's interesting because one of the channels that I like to follow likes to talk about the what ifs. For example, who would be the Tsar of Russia today if the Romanovs still ruled Russia, and then they kind of trace the family tree and show you that. Well, one of the what ifs they did was if George Washington had in fact been made a king, who would be the king today? And one of the plausible concepts to that was that Robert E. Lee's descendants would be the monarchs today, which makes sense because Robert E. Lee married George Washington's adopted granddaughter. So it was kind of interesting to see that, and people forget that the Lees and the Washingtons were so closely related. George Washington didn't have any known biological children himself, so that's why he had adopted Martha's 2 children and then later her grandson. There is some evidence he may have fathered a biological child with a slave. It also could have been another relative of his who had done that. I think his name was Westford. I could be wrong about that, but I think that was the name. Okay, the Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act. This is another huge deal leading up to the Civil War. In order to deal with the new territory acquired by the Mexican-American War, the United States was divided again on slavery. So the Fugitive Slave Act was the law that allowed Southern slave owners to reacquire their slaves who had escaped to freedom in the North. And that's what it's saying here. And that became an issue, and so they upheld the Fugitive Slave Act, and in the process, the agreement was that they would admit California as a free state without admitting any slave states to balance it, that was kind of the first time that had happened, going all the way back to the Missouri Compromise. All of these are going to give me a 5% stability. So going all the way back to the Missouri Compromise, what they had always done was admitted a free state and a slave state at the same time. So they kept the balance of power in Congress, especially in the Senate, so there'd be equal numbers of senators from free and slave states. All right, specie payments or confiscate $20 bills. They both kind of do the same thing. And we're going to go down the northern focus tree. So, all right. Now we already talked about doing that. Let's look at mechanical engineering. Steam locomotive 2. Let's do that. All right, we're going to go ahead and admit Oregon as a state. We're up to almost 100 legislative power points. I'm actually going to, off camera, I'll do this, but I want to start looking at some of these policies that we can change. James Buchanan holds a speech. I don't know that either one of these are going to matter a whole lot because we're getting close. This is actually going to be the year of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So we can ban extremist parties, conscription laws. We've got voting rights. We right now have universal male suffrage, but you can go a couple of different ways. Universal suffrage, which would give it to women as well. Here's the slavery issue, which obviously we can't deal with at the moment. Overwhelming political stability. If you call 40% overwhelming, oh wait, where's political stability? That's political stability is 2. Oh, that's actually pretty good, I guess. Okay. Oh, civil war in Mexico. Tensions between liberals and conservatives in Mexico has been growing for quite some time now. So here's a did you know? Oh, Napoleon III has been assassinated. So here's a did you know? The Emperor Maximilian, who ends up taking power for a time in Mexico, I believe was the brother of Franz Joseph, who was the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire for most of basically all of the last half of the 19th century and all the way up into the middle of World War I. So some of the other things you can do in the policies is you have healthcare policies that can be changed. Now, a lot of these policies are limited by certain national factors that have to be changed. For example, I can't do anything to change slavery until after the Civil War takes place. That's just the reality. But some of these can be changed. The economy, for example, if I can get up to 250, I can start mobilizing the economy. But a lot of those I can't really do anything about. But those will be in the future as we get after the Civil War and we can really start impacting things. Uncle Tom's Cabin. That's Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote this book. And had a huge impact on the North, especially because it opened the eyes of many Northern people to what was happening with slavery. And it really kind of started to turn public sentiment, especially in the North. Now, one of the main things that happened, and we're going to get into this here pretty soon with the Civil War, is that the Republican Party was formed in the 1850s. They ran their first national candidate in 1856 for president. It was John C. Fremont. And the Republican Party was the first party that was kind of formed with a big part of its platform, the idea of limiting or in some cases even abolishing slavery. They were formed from the remnants, the anti-slavery remnants of the old Whig Party, which the Whig Party kind of was factions. It had Southern Whigs, Northern Whigs, pro-union, pro-slavery, anti-slavery. And so out of the ashes of that, the pro-union, northern, anti-slavery part of the Whig Party forms the Republican Party. And so when Abraham Lincoln gets elected in 1860, it's not because there's a huge national consensus for the Republicans. It's because the Democrats and some of the former Whigs had basically run 3 other candidates. You had the old pro-union Southern Whigs forming the Constitutional Union Party under John Bell. You had 2 Democrat candidates. One was Stephen Douglas and the other was John C. Breckinridge. And so the 3 of them all kind of split the Southern vote and allowed Lincoln to sweep most of the North and win the election. All right, so as I mentioned, Kansas becomes a bloodbath. The Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed for self-determination when it came to slavery. And of course, that meant that pro-slavery and anti-slavery people started pouring into these territories so they could sway it one way or the other. And of course, that inevitably, social Darwinism as at work, led to clashes. And this is where John Brown first comes to prominence because he's one of the people active on the anti-slavery side of things. All right, we've completed our northern focus in the national focus tree, and that allows us now to start focusing on Great Lakes expansion. We're going to add some infrastructure, civilian industry, and we're going to do all of it in the north so that when we do get into Civil War, we'll have that little bit of an extra edge. Bavaria wants to play big. It wants to play a bigger role in the concert of Europe, and so that's just one of those first steps toward the unification of Germany. Railway infrastructure consideration. Yeah, sure, why not? Comet sighted. It's an omen. The end is nigh. Oh, okay. No matter what I do, it's going to give base stability -1. So, but you can see here how Germany's still Kingdom of Hanover, which up until not long before this was still in a personal union with the British Empire as well. But by this point, it wasn't anymore. And that is because when Victoria became queen, the Hanoverian crown could not pass to a female. So at that point, the crown of Hanover and the crown of the United Kingdom were separate. We're going to add a political advisor. We've got Salmon P. Chase, who was from Ohio. I think he was the governor of Ohio. He later becomes the Treasury Secretary and then the Chief Justice of the United States. Simon Cameron was from Pennsylvania, and he was kind of a corrupt dude who, but he helped swing the election or the nomination to Lincoln because he moved Pennsylvania's delegates from backing William H. Seward to backing Abraham Lincoln with the kind of, but not really spelled out promise that he would get a role in the administration. He becomes Lincoln's first Secretary of War, but he was later replaced by Edwin Stanton, who was born in Steubenville, Ohio, which is right about here. All right, Great Lakes expansion is done. And I went ahead and admitted Kansas to the Union as a state. And you'll have to wait till after the Civil War that we start dealing with some of these Native American tribes. You can see the Mexican Civil War still going strong. We'll probably get right up to the start of the Civil War in this episode. It does sim pretty slowly, and there are a lot of events, so I think it'll probably take us right up to the eve of the Civil War, maybe when it first breaks out. That's where we'll end this episode today. There's the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So one of the things people don't always realize is that, okay, so Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas were running for the Illinois Senate seat. People didn't vote on senators back then. Senators were selected by the state legislature. That was the way it was built into the Constitution. It was only in the progressive era, I think in the 1910s, when a constitutional amendment was passed that allowed for the direct election of senators. So even though they were debating and they were doing these really well-known speeches for the people, those people had no say whatsoever in who got that Senate seat, and it was given to Stephen Douglas. And then 2 years later, those same two guys were two of the four major candidates running for president. All right, so I just queued up building a textile mill. Cloth is the one and only one thing that I have to import right now because I'm not producing enough of it on my own. Obviously, that's going to change when the war breaks out and we're having to produce a whole lot more than we are now. But for now, that's the case. Military industry focus, we just added a new slot of military industry. Now we're going to do naval industry focus. I'm also toying with the idea of releasing Texas as a nation because I'm wondering if I do that, will that mean that they are not a part of the Confederacy when the war breaks out and therefore make the Confederacy that much easier for me to take down? I don't know. Of course, that would mean that I would lose Texas after the war. But I feel like that might be a price worth paying. So I'm going to think about that a little bit. So let's take a look here because there are additional tabs that I hadn't realized were here before. You have to switch the page here. And we've got a military high command. You can have a minister of war. In this case, it feels like that would be a good area for McClellan. Now, these aren't the actual images like for Stonewall Jackson. It is for Robert E. Lee. John Bell Hood, who right now would be like 27 years old. George Thomas. I think we're going to go with George Thomas for that. You can have a chief of the army. And again, you get these bonuses. Although some people, it says they are not fit for those positions. Army morale. We'll probably lose Robert E. Lee when the time comes. Same thing with the Navy. You can do Secretary of the Navy. That's pretty cool. Internal politics. You take a look at your parliament, or in this case, a Congress. You can call for an election. You can reform the country. I don't know how you do that. Oh, interesting. So you can call for reforms. This is actually really cool. I don't think there's a way to call for a reform over slavery, but that would be amazing if you could do that. What do we want to reform? Although, right now is probably not the time to do that. So maybe we'll kind of hang tight on that for now. Military spending. And I think that's how you affect. Let's take a look at that for a second, because I believe that military spending is how you affect your manpower most readily. So I want to take a look at that for just a second. It's not there. It's down here. So internal budget, police force, basic infrastructure, so right here you have the economic policies, the military budget. Right now we're at 2%. So you can see how it impacts your military gets better. You get better attack, better defense. Military leader cost goes down. Legislative power gain changes, so you can see the experience gain. So it doesn't affect manpower. That's still under the conscription laws, but it affects pretty much everything else. Okay, so we've made it down the focus tree, and now we have some choices here. Tame the West, which is going to add infrastructure to Kansas, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. Reuse crash railroads. It's going to add infrastructure to a bunch of northern states. I feel like that's probably the way to go. Yeah, I think we're going to do that. You can see right now what I'm working on as far as research goes. Traction engine, engineer company 1, polymer chemistry, and better designs for firearms. If you're curious at all about what's going on in the rest of the world here in February of 1859, take a look at all the wars that are currently happening around the world. And this may be part of why the game sims rather slowly compared to some other mods, because there's just so much happening. And there is such depth to this game. All right, so we did reuse crash railroads. We're going to go ahead and add the infrastructure over in the west now. We have to get all 3 of those before we can select panic recovery. And of course, we're going to recover from the panic just in time for the election. Okay, so I'm looking at the internal politics page, and I'm going to try to spend 100 legislative power to see if we can increase our military budget, because I think that's going to help in the upcoming war. We're going to vote for that reform. The government proposes the Military Budget Act of 1859. We could spend another 50 legislative power to vote now. Let's vote in a month. We'll see how that goes. In the meantime, another national focus. We're going to do the California Railway. Let's see how this vote goes. Okay. Today is the day the government decides on the future of the Military Budget Act of 1859. After careful counting all of the votes, the final results are in. Yay 120, nay 136. Boo. Not cool. Oh well, it was worth a try. Oh, what's happening now? Ecuador declared war on the Republic of Ecuador. We got a lot of civil wars happening right now down in South America. I think there's one going on in Chile. You can see that there. So wars throughout the world, in fact. Over here, we've got some conflicts that were happening in Italy. I think that's all been dealt with and finalized now. But a lot still to come, man. We are just getting started in this mod. Sam Houston, elected governor of Texas. He did that a few times. He was the president of Texas when it was an independent nation. And Houston was vehemently opposed to secession when the Civil War broke out. And he was actually thrown out as governor at that point when Texas seceded. People don't realize how many of our historical figures were actually part of the Confederate government. John Tyler, former president of the United States, was elected to the Confederate Congress, though I don't believe he ever took his seat because he died right at the beginning of the war in like 1862. John C. Breckinridge, who was vice president of the United States up until March of 1861, became, I believe, the Confederate Secretary of War, ended up a general in the field. He was the one who actually surrendered the city of Vicksburg to Ulysses S. Grant. Here's John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. We have some choices. Robert E. Lee was the man in command of the troops who dealt with that, and who eventually captured John Brown. Historically, he was executed. I don't know that it matters a whole lot. We'll let Lee handle him. But that's kind of one of the final straws that lead us up into the war. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up right there. The next episode that'll happen, and this will become a regular part of our rotation. We've also got a few other series that I'm finishing up. But the next episode will be the American Civil War. It'll be our fight to remake this nation and then start pushing forward from there. I expect this to be a long series because we've only gotten through 2 years, and you can see how long it took. And I'm only showing you maybe one of every 5 minutes of the gameplay. So thanks for watching. Drop a like if you would. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And please leave a comment. Let me know what you think of this mod. Let me know what you think about the direction I should go with all of this. And we'll see you again soon.